Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend the Welcome to Fanfiction World, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is series A What If Deku Becomes Witch Doctor. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to seriously think about your future. Deku could hear his teacher rambling off about quirks, but only parts of the sentences actually filtered into his consciousness. The sound of his scrawling pen calmed him. Taking notes about the giant hero he had encountered that morning lightened his mood. It lightened his mood when the teacher was inciting his peers to flaunt their quirks and their chance at joining a heroics program. His pencil tip snapped under pressure. He sighed, wiping the graphite dust from his notebook. The sounds of cheers and excitement brought him the exact opposite. He withdrew into his chair. Using a quirk in public was a violation. Neither they nor the teacher really cared. Meekly, he raised his hand in the chaos. He wanted to join a heroics program too. He just wanted to be a hero, like his role model. These people did too. Biting his lip, the quirkless boy analyzed the quirks of his classmates. He was pretty much used to and familiar with them. The boy with the long eye stalks creeped him out, even more so than the piano fingers guy. He didn't care though. Those kinds of quirks would be better than nothing, even if not really combat viable. A familiar voice rang out into the classroom. Deku filled with icy dread. Hey teach, don't lump us all into the same group. I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects. The green-haired boy covered his ears at the sudden uproar. It was not a surprise, of course. Bakugo was just like that. Deku's gaze fell, ruminating over the words, even if unintended for a quirkless boy, likely even less than the so-called rejects. What did that make him then? He glanced at the perching birds through the window. It had been a nice day. Some banter later, the teacher carelessly interjected. Oh, if I remember correctly, you want to go to UA. Hi, right, Bakugo. It's not like Bakugo was ever disciplined. His superiority was accepted. Deku could guess why. Images of violent explosions and pure power playing back in his mind. An astonished look flashed across Deku's face. He fidgeted in place, anticipating his own interest to be called out alongside Bakugo's. Face down on the desk, he listened to his classmates ramble off about how good UA was. Deku agreed with them for the most part. It was where he wanted to go. It was arguably the best heroics school out of them all. As such, it held the lowest entry rates. He knew this from incessant online research in the early morning hours, much too late for his mother's favor. The blonde boy continued his rant. That's why you guys are just extras. I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. Deku did them as well, multiple times, phenomenally from what the numbers told him. He'd get past the written portion for sure, but that was it. I'll definitely surpass All Might and become the top hero. My name'll be inscribed on the list of top earners. Clenching his hand somewhat, Deku startled when the pencil snapped in his hand. But he did not have the time to mourn the lost pencil. He flinched upon hearing his name. Oh yeah, Midoriya wanted to go to UA too, right? Fidgeting in place, he was pointedly aware of Bakugo's uncharacteristic silence. Deku knew what was coming. Everybody stared at him, stunned, before breaking out into a universal mockery. Huh, Midoriya, no way, a voice added. Another one interjected. You can't get into the hero course just by studying. Sprouting from his desk, Deku stood and planted his palms on the wooden top. He needed to stable himself, something also evidently needed for his voice. They got rid of that rule. There's just no precedent. His lips trembled and eyes were wide. Bakugo's fist whirled through the air, faster than the quirkless boy could react. Bracing himself for the coming explosion, the shockwave still managed to throw him to the floor. Gray smoke curled up from Bakugo's tensed hand. "Hey Deku." He flinched and cowered on the floor, but still glanced up to meet Bakugo's wrathful stare. "You're below the rejects. You're quirkless." It was almost funny in an entirely terrifying way how villainous he appeared. Clutching and wriggling his smoke-veiled fingers while clenching and unclenching his jaw. Downright sadistic. Nobody cared though or bothered to interrupt. They knew what Bakugo was capable of. "How can you even stand in the same ring as me?" The mantra repeated itself in Deku's mind. He was kinder, smarter, gentler. It satiated the need to burst out in tears, from both fear and humiliation. From experience, he knew how painful a direct hit would be, and so naturally, he held out his hand in a pathetically weak defense. "No, wait, Kachan." Deku pleaded to Bakugo, knowing it wouldn't actually do anything. He was powerless. Deku needed to backpedal. That's what usually worked. "It's not like I'm trying to compete with you or anything. Believe me, it's just that it's been my goal ever since I was little, and well, I won't know unless I try." He hated it, having to beg like this, hated how he didn't even get enough respect as to not be threatened on a daily basis without intervention. Prided itself on progressiveness in terms of quirkless issues, but it was likely the only school in Japan that did. The posters stuck up haphazardly did nothing to stop Bakugo's abuse, did nothing to concern the teachers that pointedly ignored the entirely one-sided spats. "What I mean unless ya try." Smoke gathered in Bakugo's hands. Deku cowered. He sank to the classroom floor, frightened into paralysis as his peers and tormentors towered above. Seemingly stuck to the cold tile, he could only pray that Bakugo's punches wouldn't injure or maim. "Are you taking the test for fun?" "No." He wanted to cry out, but his voice too suffered from fright-induced paralysis. "What the hell can you do? You're quirkless." Venom-drenched words seared themselves into Deku's mind. He was quirkless, pathetic, weak, lame, waste. Through all of his childhood, Bakugo's words meant nothing, the neglect and exclusion from his peers meant nothing. The dirty looks sent his way meant nothing, nor did the hushed whispers and worried glances. Even after being encouraged to jump off the school roof, he pushed through. He may have been all of those things, but he'd never prove that to any of his classmates. Dull magenta eyes gazed into the classroom, white paws perched on the same branch from which birds had previously stood. Its tail swished contently. The green-haired boy would do. Deku stared down at his charred and soggy journal. He wasn't angry though. The sun was shining and the koi swam in swift circles around pieces of ripped paper. Nothing too bad had occurred, and it's not like he had been injured either. It was usually like this. He'd feel better by the time class was dismissed and he was all alone with only his surroundings for company. It was the peacefulness that calmed him. It kept him sane. Staring into his reflection on the rippling water surface, he cleared the insults from his mind. He needed to stay positive. Laughing audibly to himself, it seemed to further lighten his mood. A slopping gurgling sound disrupted his laughter. Gagging as his nostrils were violated by a horrid stench, he whipped his head around and grew pale at the manifesting figure. Green sludge gathered and formed before his eyes. Intense yellow eyes glared menacingly at the fear-stricken boy. An innocent voice called out pleadingly. Everywhere at once. Run! It was almost robotic, but it startled him from his trance. Fueled by fear, Deku weaved his way around lashing tendrils as he darted out into the school's courtyard. Sweat poured down his forehead. Deku gasped for air. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. That villain had some kind of elemental quirk, definitely strong enough to kill by suffocation. Nobody would save him. Nobody knew what was happening. All Might wouldn't swoop down and save him. This was right now. Cursing his panic-wrought brain, he desperately thought up a plan. It was long past dismissal, but he hoped the villain would fear public areas. Darting out into the courtyard, he rounded the school's corner, hoping to find a crowd of people to blend in with. Nobody. Flattening himself against the courtyard wall, he peered around the corner skeptically. The sludge man was hiding from somebody. Distracted, a small white cat bounded out from an alleyway, skipping straight towards him. The voice returned. Quick, make a wish and contract with me, Izuku Midoriya. We don't have much time. The villain will easily overpower you, but I can make you stronger. Just make a wish. Deku panicked, senses overloaded and desperately trying to figure out what in the fuck was actually going on. A bunny no. Cat was trying to get him to make a wish. Deku buried his head in his palms, grinding down against his forehead. Tears streamed down his face. He didn't want to die. He didn't even have to think about his wish, his mouth moving faster than his mind and blurting it out before he could think. It was probably for the best, considering how that villain was likely to be lurking just around the corner. I just want to be a superhero. Saying those words out loud liberated him in a way. His voice echoed with passion and courage. It healed the emotional burns suffered earlier that day. It just felt right to proclaim his desire so freely. Pain soon swept away that feeling as the area was doused in a pine-green light. An agonized groan tore itself from his mouth. It felt as if somebody had clamped his innards and was tearing him up from the inside out. Calming himself down, he took a deep breath. As soon as the pain arrived, was as quick as it departed. The green light dimmed. Deku felt lighter. Now, transform. Deku wanted to object, but that would have been a lie. He knew how to transform. It was instinct now. Willing the green light to wash over his body, he glimmered with glee as swirls of paper encircled his torso and limbs. Morphing and taking shape into a green costume, his outfit registered. It was strange, foreign right. He wore a dark green sweater, on which a plethora of white felt rabbit faces were crudely stitched. From his shoulders, a light green cloak flowed down to rest at his hips. Beneath his sweater, a pair of beige shorts clung a bit too high up his legs. Green and white Vans covered his feet, and black socks sprung up from his ankles and came to rest just below his knees. His socks were trimmed with fluffy white fur along the top, creating a sort of plush finish. Tightening his grip, papers molded around his hands, leaving him with a pair of pastel green gloves that looked to be a mix of tactical and hand-knitted. Drawing up his hood, the white bunny ears stood semi-stiff, half-bent but still pointing upwards. Like a choker, a gold chain wrapped snugly around his neck, encasing a pine-green gemstone shaped like the outline of a bunny face, complete with ears and all. The cool breeze reminded Deku of how exposed he felt. Shameful, he pulled on the hoodie's puff-ball drawstrings and relished in the fabric warmth. A crazed yell brought Deku back into reality. Hungry. My mistress, awaits company for her meal. Dine with us. Dine with us. The villain stared at him, green sludge forming into pointed teeth. Deku had a feeling this man was beyond reasoning, going off on some sort of psychotic tirade. It unsettled the hero. He could sense a dark energy lurking in the man. The unnatural voice echoed into his mind again. Wow, you're a lot more powerful than I thought. Use your gauntlets or your magic to neutralize the threat, it's like transforming. Not needing further direction, Deku fished around in the sweater's front pocket, grasping his brown leather-bound journal. Opening it up, he glanced down at the first and only entry. Bakugo. Katsuki Bakugo. Explosion, was written in bolded letters as the page's header. It was unsettling to see his own handwriting on something he knew he didn't write. Some of the things about Bakugo were already known, but a quick glance of the jot notes left him surprised. Dodging the villain's sludge slash was easier than Deku had expected. Unnaturally so. Mistress H hungers. Deku reached into the page with his right hand, somewhat surprised at himself that it had worked. Quickly withdrawing it alongside dodging another lethargic swipe, the hero clenched his now armored hand. Closing the journal, he placed it back into the sweater pocket, noticing how the item's weight vanished upon doing so. The villain groaned in anger. Fitted firmly to his fist, Deku now sported a dark green gauntlet. Holding it out towards the villain, a sudden explosion detonated from his palm. Startled by his own ability, Deku jumped back and screeched as that too familiar gray smoke curled from his gauntlet. There was no time to contemplate his powers. The hero sprang towards the villain with a clenched fist. Mere seconds after impact, a powerful explosion rocked the courtyard. The creature splattered with ease, green goop sticking in clumps to most nearby surfaces. Deku gaped. Intimidated by his own recently acquired ability, he stuffed his hands back into his sweater pocket. Glancing around nervously, he sighed. Nobody was watching. The cat bunny stared up at him, eyes glossy and red. You did great. That villain was kissed by a witch. You've made great progress by defeating it. Deku nodded, not really knowing anything about witches or kisses. It was a foreign concept to him, but so was making a wish and gaining a quirk. Or, did this even count as a quirk? It was certainly quirky, but certainly not naturally developed. The boy frowned, overcome by doubt. Something felt off. Wait, back up, can you explain to me what just happened? We have tea time now, right? The bunny stared up. They locked eyes as the creature spoke in that echoey encompassing way. Sure. No problem. I think it'd be better for you to return home first. Wouldn't want to worry your mother, now would we? I'm QB, in case you were wondering. Deku nodded. They walked home together, QB perched innocently on the boy's shoulder. Nobody crossed their path while returning, but likely due to how Deku chose the scenic and somewhat secret path. It was past an alleyway and between two buildings. His neighbors grew many plants, providing a certain lively charm to his own and the nearby properties. Blinking away general confusion and surprise, his adrenaline slowly faded. Some lingered and probably would remain in his system for a while. There just was a certain disbelief Deku found himself in, a certain hopefulness. He felt different. He was no longer pathetic. Midoriya residence. A green light illuminated his dark bedroom. His curtains flowed with the wind as a cool breeze filtered in. His mother had been mostly unperturbed, believing his excuse about having to stay late to work on a project with his classmates. He didn't know how to tell his mother about whatever had happened or even if he should tell her. His gut told him no, she couldn't know about the magical origin. The soul gem stood on his bedside table. Set in gold, the gem had a rich pine green hue. The gilding was beautiful, wrapping around the gemstone and forming a golden base and top. A crude bunny face symbol was set in the gold at the top. In a flash, the glow dissipated from his gem, casting the room into darkness as a silver ring formed on his hand. Similarly, a green gem was set in the ring, shaped like a bunny face with floppy ears. Runes were etched into the metal. He didn't know what they meant. So, a witch's kiss, Deku couldn't believe it, but it was somewhat reasonable considering all that had happened. Part of him expected to wake up at any second, but the remaining part knew that pain he had felt while contracting had been all too real. Kyuubi spoke in his mind. Yes, magical girls or boys, are born from wishes and spread hope, but witches are born from curses and spread despair. When souls are overcome with grief and despair, a witch is born. To ensnare a victim, a witch can send out its energy to override a person's mind, thus kissing them. Once kissed, a person has completely succumbed to the witch's whims, and cannot be saved without the help of a magical girl. Most villainous acts or unexpected deaths can be attributed to the influence of a witch. As much as it confused Deku, it honestly kinda made sense. But that conclusion posed many more questions. Was this stuff common knowledge? Was it taught to new heroes? He wagered against it, considering how this had been the first time he ever heard about magical girls and boys. It hurt to think about what all of the events implied. Quirks were expected and normal, even if seemingly supernatural. How strong of a wish could Kyuubi have granted? Why haven't I heard about any of this before? Do heroic agencies know about any of this stuff? Kyuubi swished its tail and snuggled into Deku's pillow. He hoped it wouldn't shed. No, they are completely unaware. All instances of detection have been forgotten with time. Heroic agencies falsely believe themselves to know everything regarding quirks and powers. I mostly contract the quirkless as a natural quirk would provide a sort of interference between abilities. It wouldn't be good for them. As you know, quirkless people are often discarded by society. They don't get paid much attention, and so most magical boys or girls fly under their radar. Plus, if a magical ability is seen, it's often dismissed as just a quirk. You'd be wise to avoid detection of the true nature of your abilities. In the few instances of detection and inquiry I have witnessed, ability regulating organizations are deeply disturbed by the power held by those who make a wish with me. The powers I grant through wishes are incredibly stronger than quirks by default. Kyuubi's voice grew serious, but its eyes remained glassy and unblinking, glowing magenta somewhat in the dark. They were imprisoned and experimented on for weaponization and public safety. You'd think they'd be satisfied with naturally occurring quirks. Humanity's thirst for power always surprises me. It was spoken in a matter-of-fact way, almost cheeky in the upshift of tone. Deku took notes and scribbled quickly with his pen. A new exercise book, labeled, Green Rabbit. How about witches? How have they never been detected? Kyuubi swished its tail. It's simple. Witches are only able to be seen by people who were kissed or have the potential to make a wish with me. You'll see the witch's mark around their neck when kissed, if not transformed with their quirk. Additionally, they retreat into their self-made labyrinths to hide from magical boys like you. Food for thought. That would largely explain why there hasn't been any widespread panic about witches spreading despair. From the sound of it, their habits of preying reminded him of a spider, weaving a web from the shadows while waiting for an insect to wander into its trap. Deku smiled, curiosity sated. The unease lifted from his chest. He had more of a grasp now on how things worked. There were a few questions at the back of mind, but he honestly couldn't care. The thrill of finally having strength and ability overtook him. Bouncing on his bed, Deku perused through his journals and contemplated his newfound ability. From what he had used, it was likely some form of mimicry. Deku liked that ability, it just felt right. The general use of his magic was known to him innately, but there were a few knowledge gaps he'd have to fill on himself. He thought of how he could apply it in battle, and how he could use it to his advantage. This would definitely aid in his application to UA. Footsteps ascended towards his room. Deku panicked and froze. Kyuubi licked its paw. As much as Deku loved his mother and how supportive she was of his endeavors, he wasn't too fond to see her entering his room. She didn't even knock. Instead, she barged in and frowned at him. Kyuubi did not react, jumping down onto the floor and crawling over into his lap. If she saw, she didn't notice. His mother did not comment on the weird cat-bunny hybrid, nor on its impossibly floating golden rings. "Dear, I heard you talking from downstairs. On the phone with a friend." Frustrated and annoyed as a teenaged son would be, he yelled out a bit louder than intended. "Mom. Yes, a friend on the phone. We were just talking about the upcoming UA entrance examinations. We're going to take the written part together." Deku never prided himself on his ability to lie. It was mediocre at best. Lying to his mother was probably not the morally superior thing to do, but it's not like he could reveal what had actually occurred. It was a little white lie, that's it. He didn't have a friend that he was doing the entrance exam with, didn't have anybody really. The only person he'd know there was likely Bakugo. He facepalmed at the idea, hoping the tyrant's tantrums wouldn't squander his chances of joining now that he actually could participate in the physical assessment. "Oh, right, okay. Speaking of that, want me to hand in your forms now?" "I don't think there's any point in going over them and revising any more than you already have. I'm a bit worried about you, actually. I know that you can do anything you can set your mind to, but I think we both know how this is going to end up. Look, I just don't want you to get your hopes up. That's all. Whatever happens though, I'll always love you." She was loving, caring, and sensitive. The perfect mother really. His peers complained constantly about their overbearing and strict parents, but Deku couldn't understand that way of thinking. Sure, She could be a bit much at times, but not enough for him to complain. He cherished the fact that he was appreciated and loved, especially with his quirkless status. A sudden thought sprung to his mind. He needed to correct his quirk registry on the form. "Mom, I developed a quirk today." Or, "I think I just noticed it now." He watched his mother's face fall slightly. She sighed. "Honey, the doctor confirmed you were quirkless because of your pinky toe, remember? I know you want to get into UA, but lying on your forms won't get you anywhere." Deku bit his lip. Grunting slightly, he exhaled deeply. "I've actually been planning to tell you for a while. I had a whole surprise done up and a costume too. Let me go put it on first, okay?" His mother was not amused. She shook her head. Grabbing her son's shoulders, she stared into his eyes. "You are still important even while quirkless. It's hard for me to say this, but you need to grow up. Accept the fact that you're quirkless. My quirk isn't heroic or strong, but I manage just fine." Tears trickled from her eyes. She didn't understand what it was like to be quirkless. It was almost insulting that she thought it was only about power. Deku really did feel guilty about lying to her mom like this, but it's not like he had any other choice. If she didn't see him transform, she would just think he dressed up. Instead of trying to convince her further, Deku simply descended downstairs and into the spare room. Rummaging through the closet, he paid no mind to the loud rattling hangers and falling boxes. It would be best for her to hear the sounds, furthering the deception. Green light doused his body as his outfit suddenly clothed him. Deku posed slightly in the body mirror, liking what he saw. Maybe it was just his imagination, but he recognized the subtle bulge of muscles on his arms and legs. Musculature that hadn't been there before. It matched his new feeling of strength and invigoration. Blushing at the realization that he didn't look half bad, instead very girly, he focused on the task at hand. Reaching into his sweater pocket, he produced the leather-bound journal. Holding it felt right, comfortable. At Bakugo's entry, Deku reached into the page. The feeling would never be describable or boring to him. Cold. The inside of his pocket and inside the pages was almost jarringly frigid. It was like breaching the surface of water by reaching in, but with a book page. Upon feeling the armored gauntlet taking form alongside the slight scent of nitroglycerin, Deku removed his hand. The process was noticeably slow, worrying almost. Definitely not great for mid-combat switching. Testing out his powers once more, assuring he actually had them, Deku detonated an explosion in his fist. The shock sent him to the ground. It had been a bit stronger than he anticipated. Glancing around the room, the only damage appeared to be a blackened cardboard box from which smoke twirled. "Izuku, what was that sound? Are you okay?" His mother's voice was frantic as she pounded down the stairwell. "Great." The door flung open once more without knocking or notice, she gasped. Her eyes trailed over her son's outfit. From the strange look on her face, Deku didn't know if she approved or hated it. Somewhat distracted by his flashy green costume, she failed to notice the charring until she sniffed. A curious sound escaped her lips. "Mom, I can explain." Hands on her hips, she frowned sadly. "Go ahead." At least she wasn't crying anymore. "My quirk is mimicry. I think they have to be used on me in order to be copied, which would explain how I didn't realize. Earlier today Bakugo hit me with one of his explosions. It was an accident, but then it clicked. Controlling his magic more tightly, Deku set off a small blast in his armored palm. The look on his mother's face shifted, dawning with realization. A joyous glow washed over her before she ran towards him and scooped up her son in a bear hug. "My baby, Deku, I'm so happy. I just wanted you to be happy." They both cried tears of happiness, both sobbed with joy. He felt right now, he felt worthwhile. He wasn't quirkless anymore. "I know, Mom, I know." She pinched his cheeks. "Your costume was so cute. Who helped you make it?" Deku fiddled with his fingers, nervously glancing away. "Oh, the friend I told you about. She helped me sew and stuff. I used a bit of my allowance for the materials, but I think it was worth it." She sniffled. "Oh, does my dear have a girlfriend? When can I meet her?" Deku had no response. Mind coming up with a blank, he stuttered out a response. "Oh, I sometime later." "Okay." Nodding, she released Deku from her hold. Wiping a tear from her eye, his mother relented and sat down on a nearby stool. She had a hopeful look in her eyes, one that invigorated Deku. He needed to be a hero, needed to help. Thoughts of defeating villains danced in his mind. Deku froze. Had he killed that sludge quirk user? Mind scouring back and replaying the afternoon's events, panic overtook him. He was not a registered hero and has no license. If anybody saw him, he'd almost certainly been jailed, even if it was a villain. He was uncertain. Could he claim self-defense if apprehended? Certainly, he could, but would the officers believe him? "I need a moment, Izuku. I honestly never thought this moment would happen. Can you believe it? I'm still struggling, but it doesn't matter. I'm just so happy. We can fill in those forms again, you'll get in for sure." "I know you will, Deku." Taking a much-needed deep breath, Deku attempted to calm himself down. Moody had seen him. They would have intervened. His school had dismissed and it was late in the afternoon. Nobody should have been there anyway. Raking a hand through his hair, he almost forgot that his mom was currently ecstatic about the sudden development. He'd be fine. Nobody saw. "Yeah, right, yeah." Clapping her hands together, his mom beamed. "I'll go make us some celebratory hot chocolate, okay?" His mother was just nice like that. The creamy and rich taste of hot chocolate was always enough to lift his mood. Normally used as a pick-me-up during his emotional downs, Deku hoped it'd be a pleasant change to have it in celebration. After nodding towards his mother, she slipped out of the room and into the kitchen. Listening as she ran the tap and filled the kettle, he smiled. Kyuubi slid into his lap once more. Its tail wagged. "You're an excellent liar." The compliment did not make him feel as though a compliment should. It was not something for him to be proud of. Heroes did not deceive, but how, otherwise, could Deku be a hero? It was a regrettable thing, sure, but the damage done by deceiving words was surely grossly outweighed by vanquishing evil. Vanquishing witches is a magical boy and villains is a hero. Deku was certain of it. He could lie to keep himself safe. "I think you'll make an excellent substitute for a hero. Your first act will be neutralizing the witch that kissed the villain. You wouldn't want him to hurt anybody else, right?" Deku did not want the witch to hurt any others. Deku sighed and hesitated. "Are you sure it's around here somewhere?" The dock wobbled under his feet. The salty smell of ocean life lingered in his nose. The sun had long since set, moonlight shimmering across the still sea surface. Kyuubi's voice echoed in his mind. Yep, look at your soul gem, it will flash faster and faster depending on how close you get to it. The cat bunny rode on his shoulder as Deku held out his egg-shaped gem. The green light flashed intermittently, increasingly so while facing down the dock. Common sense kicking in, the young hero made his way down the somewhat decrepit wooden boardwalk. If not for the handrails, he would have feared to slip on the algae and being swept away to sea. The harbor was never his favorite part of the city. It smelled bad, nobody swam in its polluted waters, and he lived pretty far from it anyway. Far enough to catch the last bus out towards this part of the city an hour prior. Again, he did not like how he'd had to lie to his mom. Deku couldn't see her approving of such a late-night excursion. Slipping through his open window had been easier than anticipated. Still, being away from home this late at night was somewhat unsettling. All in the name of justice, he could handle this. Being a hero would likely take him worse places than an unsightly harbor. Ocean wind blew against his t-shirt, cooling him down enough to shiver. To Kyuubi, he grumbled. Man, it's pretty cold out here. Hope we find the witch soon. Are you sure it's even out here? Kyuubi snuggled into his chest. Yes, I am positive. Follow your soul gem and you'll be there in no time. Transforming will allow you to heat your body with magic more efficiently than if not. You'll also likely have an easier time finding the witch. Deku paused, grinding his foot down into the wood with a shiver. Wait, I can do that. The cat bunny nodded. Certainly. As green light doused his body, Deku willed warmth to embrace him. No sooner than he had transformed, his shivers ceased. Even with his legs mostly exposed, not even the slightest hint of goosebumps riddled his skin. Regardless, Deku pulled up his green bunny hood out of habit. Teasing Kyuubi, he laughed. Ha ha, why didn't ya tell me earlier? Kyuubi swishes its tail, red eyes unblinking. You didn't ask. Deku shrugged, continuing to follow the now amplified miasma to its source. Instead of walking, he could now take awkward leaps at a distance rivaling those of Olympic competitors. Awkward in that he had never done so before and unfortunately slipped on a patch of mushy seaweed. Landing right on his tailbone, Deku braced himself for pain to shoot up his spine. Instead, he simply yelped at the surprise. It wasn't as painful as he had expected. Sure, the piercing displeasure could still be felt, but disconnected somehow. Deku felt disconnected from the pain of falling. With ease, he got back to his feet. You didn't see that, Kyuubi, okay. His soft laugh followed. Deku was having fun. The closer he got and the faster his soul gem pulsed, the fun seemed to waver. He was a bit nervous about fighting the witch. Was she mean? What kind of spells would she use? Deku honestly didn't know if he had it in him to eliminate a witch, didn't know if he could stomach ending the life of another. Thinking back to his prior encounter with the sludge villain, he quelled his doubt and anxiety. Things would be fine. He needed to take down this witch if she had been sowing evil and kissing citizens into doing her bidding. Jumping up onto a nearby boat, Deku stabilized himself as it rocked underneath. It was an old vessel, rusted and somewhat stained. Not unlike the other ships, but it seemed off. Soul gem pulsing constantly now, Kyuubi added. Here we are. Flare. your energy to conjure an entrance to the witch's labyrinth. Green sparkles illuminated the dark boat. The air shimmered before him, not unlike heat distortion on a hot summer's day. An outline carved itself before him in blue. A Greek tragedian mask adorned with hearts and cupids. Encircled by a nautical steering wheel, the symbol shimmered ethereally. Oh, I walk into the symbol to enter the witch's labyrinth. Nodding at the instruction, the boy held his breath and jumped through the circle. The sound of a siren wailing first caught his attention. Kneeling down as he landed on what felt like a carpet, Deku took in his surroundings and whimpered. Flashing red light intermittently illuminated the nautically themed room in sync with a blaring alarm. Water rushed into the room from a cracked porthole to his left. Watching the water gather in the corner of the room and pool, he guessed the ship to be inclined somewhat, significant enough for such to happen. Oddly surreal scraps of food littered the room, half-bitten and partially digested too. A pig's squeal caught him off guard, causing him to slink back against the damp floral wallpaper. Upon closer inspection, he saw that the flowers were crying from which real water dripped. Producing his leather-bound journal, Deku quickly flipped to the familiar entry before reaching in. Once he felt the cool metal gauntlet, the pig's squeal didn't seem as frightening. Kyubi was probably even more scared, considering how it had stopped speaking and trotted alongside him. Determined to find the source of the squealing, Deku carefully marched down the hallway. Water dripped from the ceiling above, pipes stuck out haphazardly. The ceiling was uneven and he swore the carpet was meant to trip people up. Passing a door to his left, the magical boy eyed it with suspicion. Almost as if on cue, the deranged pig squealing rang out once more before the mahogany fixture burst open. Out came a disturbingly bloated and gray-skinned pig. Gray slime oozed from slices in its skin. An apple was jammed into its mouth, not dampening its shrill shrieking in the slightest. Too stunned to react, all Deku could do was jump out of the way as the surreal pig bounded down the hallway from where he had previously left. His voice wavered with uncertainty, and legs wobbled from both the ship's rocking and the fear coursing through his veins. That's disgusting. What is that thing? Resolutely, Kyubi responded. The witch is familiar, one of her servants. They sometimes splinter off into the real world and if left to fester, grow into another witch. Deku nodded, still not any less disturbed though. The frantic squealing of the fleeing pig was soon accompanied by a more refined squealing, if one could describe it like that. While the first pig squealed madly, the second source of squealing was more musical in tone, almost as if harmonizing with itself in an angelic manner. Glancing into the room, he saw another long hallway. Deku could now see the source of the angelic squealing, a pig with crudely attached angel wings flying his way. The flying pig held a bow and arrow, one that was notched. His cue to fight, Deku charged the animal while weaving in a zigzag direction. He would hopefully be harder to hit that way. The pig was likely an enemy anyway, the weapon an indication of hostility he wouldn't gamble on. Besides, he wasn't sure if the thing was real anyway. It had a certain quality to it that he couldn't describe, almost as if it was a mishmash of drawings and photographs and toys. This pig had no cuts nor was it gagged with an apple. This pig wore a laurel crown too. A whir in the air alerted Deku to dodge, and dodge he did. From its bow, the pig had shot a pink heart-tipped arrow. With a thunk, It stuck into the wooden wall. Water trickled into the hallway around the arrow's hole in the wall. Now mere meters from the unsightly flying pig, Deku clenched his fist and readied an explosion. Feeling his energy gather in his fist, Deku willed it to concentrate and groaned out in concentration. A green aura shimmered around his gauntlet, catching him somewhat by surprise. Squealing in realization of its own fate, the pig held up its front legs in a disturbingly human reflex. As soon as his fist made contact, a green-laced explosion rocked the hallway. Instead of blood and gore, pieces of sewn-together food flew everywhere, covered in what seemed like shreds of a pink pig suit. The charred wallpaper shriveled up from the lingering heat, releasing tendrils of thick gray smoke. A worrying sound rattled out into the labyrinth. Splintering wood was heard by Deku before a torrent of water sprayed through a dent his explosion had created. Panicked, Deku yelped and darted back towards the opened door. It was not the same hallway. Instead, Deku found himself staring down a massive grand stairwell. Shining above, a comically large chandelier cast glittering lights around the room. It swayed side to side as the boat lurched and bobbed. The sound of water trickling down the ornate stairwell barely muffled the familiar and unpleasant sound of both angelic and frantic pig squealing. There were more. Dipping his left fist into the journal's page, the magical boy readied himself further for combat. Deku had been thinking of how he could apply Bakugo's quirk, thinking back to the times he had watched the blonde boy use it. As much as Deku hated to admit it, using the explosions to accelerate and increase the force of his punches was an excellent idea. Not only would it provide more momentum, the shock wave would also hopefully knock the pigs off balance. After retrieving his now armored left hand, he stuffed the journal safely back into his sweater pocket. A bloated frantic pig burst through the doors at the bottom of the stairwell, skidding to a stop and squealing upon seeing the intruder. Glancing over its cut and oozing shoulder, the pig hadn't the time to react, as a flying pig rounded the corner with a notched arrow. Jumping back away from its sight, Deku readied himself for combat. Whirring air, a pink arrow landed with a squelch between the eyes of the bloated pig. Gray ooze splattered everywhere after the pig deflated like a balloon. Deku gagged as a fleck landed beneath his left eye. Kyuubi hopped onto the glossy oak banister. The hero glanced at it while waiting for the flying pig to come his way. It'd be better to face it in an open room where he could dodge than a narrow elongated hallway. Kyuubi. Why'd it attack its fellow familiar? There was a slight pause before it answered in its usual matter-of-fact way. Witches are creatures of grief and great mental anguish. It's impossible to decipher its motives. Auto-cannibalism is not a surprising thing for a familiar's task to be. At least it made Deku's task easier. With a deep breath, Deku aimed his fists behind his back. He prepared himself to strike an ambush as the angelic squealing came his way. Smoke curled from his fists. As soon as Deku saw traces of pink pass through the double door's threshold, the dual explosions detonated. The recoil sent him hurtling towards the familiar, faster than Deku was honestly comfortable with. Wind whipped at his hair, but he was airborne for mere seconds before his fists made contact and detonated once more. The move had left him slightly disorientated and nauseous, likely a combination of the leaking bloated pig stench alongside the sudden and spiraling movement. Water pooled at his feet and rushed down through the open double doors. Smoke curled from the winged pig's corpse. This one had been filled with corn and peas. Hubie's voice instructed him further. The witch is up ahead, just down that hallway and to the left. If the familiars had been those disgusting animals, he dreaded facing the witch. How awful must one be to use some sort of pig necromancy? The leaking water followed him on his journey through the long and soggy labyrinth, splashing audibly with each of his steps. After rounding the corner, he came face to face once more with a set of double doors. Instead of wood, these doors were metallic in composition, resembling the swinging doors one would find in a restaurant. Pushing through them with ease, Deku gasped. Deku sighed, emerging from the top deck of what was now clearly a sinking Titanic. He didn't try and analyze how he had managed to end up at the top deck after descending a long set of stairs, but none of this made sense and it was likely a waste of time. Madness could not be reasoned with. A chorus of pigs squealing overwhelmed Deku, directing his attention to the bow of the ship. It just didn't make sense. A large dining table extended and snaked around the ship's deck. Walking towards it, he saw that the surface was moving, much like a conveyor belt. Regardless, the finely set china and utensils remained undisturbed. Not a single glass had fallen, even with the bound bloated pigs thrashing about on the table. Spotting a group of angelic pigs, Deku readied his fists but faltered. They were busy frantically lowering lifeboats and trying to escape the now half-submerged ship. Too busy with what appeared to be their luggage to notice him. Even with the ship's great tilt, the table's decoration remained undisturbed. Darting around a smokestack, Deku came face to face with the witch. It was nothing like he had expected, completely unhumanoid in every way. This witch did not have green skin nor did it wear a pointy black hat. Instead, the witch was an oversized Greek stage mask, a happy smirk worn on its face. It sat at the end of the table. Its mouth was animated, opening up to receive the bloated pigs. Beyond its lips was darkness. Deku could not see through the mask. A squealing pig entered halfway through its mouth when the mask clamped down, both bisecting and bursting the foul creature. The witch made a mess of the pig as it chewed the familiar up, swallowing it with a comically audible gulp. Another bound pig passed through its lips. Looking away, Deku stepped back. Slipping on a patch of water, he fell to the deck with an audible thunk. A shriek of pure horror sent a tingle down his spine while the hairs on his neck stood at attention. The shriek was pained and agonizing as if the witch itself was suffering. The witch gagged. Deku barely managed to roll out of the way before a glop of gray vomit splattered where he had fallen. It sizzled away at the deck, from which water now spouted up like a geyser. This was real. The acrid smell reinforced the severity of the situation. He could die. Now on his feet, it was much easier to dodge the second spray of vomit sent his way. Not letting the witch get another chance to attack, Deku detonated explosions in his palms, sending him flying towards the witch's nose. With this trajectory, he'd hopefully be out of the splash zone. Like he had done before, green energy shimmered around his fists midair. More than he had previously done, he charged up the nitroglycerin coating his gauntlets before he punched the porcelain mask with both fists. The sheer force of his strikes alone cracked the ivory substance, but the witch's shrieks of agony were drowned out by the green-tinted and magically imbued explosions. Flaming debris rained from the sky as Deku landed back down on the deck. While the labyrinth wobbled away back to reality, the hero couldn't help but pant with both relief and desperation upon his return. It was a surprising exit. Deku had figured he would have needed to find his way back out of the maze. Somewhat disoriented, he grounded himself by kneeling on the familiarly decrepit and stained boat. A harbor bell rang out and the sound of water sloshing against the boardwalk calmed his racing heart. He had defeated a witch. A sharp clink caught his attention. Deku flinched and raised his smoking fists in anticipation. Instead of another enemy, he simply saw a small black gem hit the ground. It rolled around on the ship's deck before coming to a stop near his feet. Picking it up, he eyed the object in suspicion. The black gem was gilded in a silver spindle, with the symbol of an arrow-pierced mask carved into the top. It felt wrong, like all of the miasma within the labyrinth condensed into an object. He placed it back on the deck, disturbed by its energy. Kyubi sauntered out from around a corner, eyes focused on the black gem. "That's a grief seed. I must congratulate you on defeating the witch. You handled yourself well for a first-timer." Deku wanted to cry, either from stress or joy. He didn't know which. The adrenaline of battle still fluttered his stomach and trembled his hands. The smell of acrid vomit lingered in his nostrils. For once, he was thankful for the overbearing stench of the sea. I could have died. That's not what I was expecting." Falling to the floor, he cradled his head in his drawn-up knees. Tears stung at his eyes. He let them flow. This was too much. Kyubi walked up next to him, prompting him to glance up with blurred vision. Its expression was unreadable. Wanting to rid himself of the stench, he willed his costume away in a burst of pine-green light. With a fluttering heartbeat, he purposefully held and lengthened his exhales. His school had given them a lecture about stress management before tests. This method was effective for him in most situations, but his heart kept up its flighty rhythm. His soul gem manifested in its egg form. Holding it up to his eyes, Deku could see it had darkened considerably. It was no longer as radiant as it had been before. Wisps of black occasionally danced through the green. You can use the grief seed to cleanse it. While in a labyrinth, the witch's grief will cling to your soul gem, thus tainting and polluting it. Using magic will also deplete its charge, accomplishing the same effect. Try it, Izuku. Nodding at the explanation, Deku picked up the grief seed from the deck and held it next to his gem. As he brought them closer to each other, a dark mist was drawn away from the egg and into the spindle. His soul gem glowed a brilliant pine green once more. Things would be okay. He could handle this. His reaction had been natural. Adrenaline was his body's natural way of preparing him for battle. Deku was safe. A deep sigh of relief followed suit. "I can't believe I just did that. Wow. At least it won't hurt anybody else." Kyubi looked up at him. Deku read its blank expression as proud. Use of a grief seed on a soul gem not only cleanses it but strengthens it, reinforces its structure and natural defenses too. Think of it as similar to how your body reacts to an immunization. It recognizes the pathogen and strengthens the immune system in general, alongside providing and almost guaranteeing a more efficient response to the pathogen in the future. Now, this doesn't mean you're immune to the lingering grief in a labyrinth. but you simply grow naturally resistant at an increment proportional to the witch's strength. The one you fought was average in strength, but you should notice a change in how fast your soul gem pollutes. Not only this, but your magic use becomes more efficient and potent while your reserves grow larger. Can you imagine? It's almost like gaining experience points in a video game and you just leveled up. Deku couldn't help but smile. How could he not? Defeating an evil was one thing, but strengthening to this degree. It was almost too good to be true, but Deku petted and rubbed the top of Kyuubi's head instead of doubting it. It had been very helpful today and yesterday. Kyuubi had not only saved his life but also essentially gifted him a quirk. Thank you so much, Kyuubi. It kinda makes sense when you compare it to something like a video game. You kinda lost me at the first part, but I get it now. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I'm sorry for having a bit of a breakdown. I don't know what came over me. Kyuubi swished its tail. Don't worry. That was a natural and completely normal human reaction to danger. You'll get one more use from the grief seed or two if you're pushing it. The stronger a witch, the more uses you'll get from the seed and thus more experience. I wouldn't overuse one if I were you. When it starts visibly radiating grief, it's full. When it's full, you should give it to me for safe disposal. Otherwise, it could hatch again, meaning you'd have to fight a strengthened version once more. Experience gain works both ways. It affects both soul gem and grief seed. Luckily, when I dispose of them, it completely neutralizes their potential to hatch. Isn't that neat? Deku smiled at Kyuubi. Yeah, it really is. We should head back home now. I'd rather not have my mom discover that I'm not there at 2 in the morning. It did not respond, but followed him as he began walking. An idea flashed in his mind, prompting Deku to transform in a familiar flash of green light. More mindful of his magic consumption, he reduced its flashiness to hopefully conserve it. Deku could feel the difference in efficiency from both the strengthening of his soul gem along with reducing its stylistic flair. Transforming had been quicker and more fluid, it didn't feel as heavy or intense. With Kyuubi by his side, he sat on a nearby bench, staring out at the dark sea. He toyed with the feeling of his magic, played around with how it felt in his body. Sending it to his feet, he concentrated the now visible green energy there. Satisfied, he stood. Deku cracked his knuckles. Jumping into the air, he willed his magic towards his feet before sending it out in a burst. To his delight, he received a sort of boost in the air, a double jump. It was more gentle than using Bakugo's quirk, but definitely not as fast. It also wouldn't incur any emergency distress calls and was rather silent. Landing with a thud on the pavement, he smiled. Kyuubi commented, "That is an interesting technique. It's similar to what I've seen other magical girls use." Deku arched a brow. Other magical girls? Oh, well, I should have expected that. I can't be the only one fighting witches, now can I? Deku used his newfound technique to aid his return home. It was liberating, running and jumping across the rooftops while veiled by night. It took a few uses to acclimate to the technique, but he aced it eventually. It was not unlike playing a rhythm game, the downstroke of his curved jump the right time for a small burst of green magic. It didn't feel all that magically draining either, compared to how Bakugo's explosions had felt. Every fiber of his being wanted to yell out in exhilaration, but he knew it'd bring him unnecessary attention. This would probably count as illegal quirk use, even though it really wasn't a quirk. As the wind whipped along his cape, he drew up his hood and tightened the drawstrings, an extra step to conceal his identity. While soaring through the skies, his mind wandered to the idea of other magical girls or boys. He wondered what powers they had, wondered what their outfits looked like. What if somebody he knew was secretly a magical girl too? Pondering it, he came up with a blank. He didn't know any other quirkless people his age, maybe he'd have to purposefully look. Deku had the whole summer ahead of him before the UA entrance examinations. There was lots of time to find a magical ally. Before he knew it, Deku landed in front of his house. All was still as he slithered in through the open window and dismissed his transformation. Forming his soul gem into its egg form, he analyzed its glow. It was admittedly not at 100% brightness, but it had definitely only depleted slightly from his extended use. Deku was fine with that. It had provided him with useful experience and mobility that he would have otherwise lacked. Plus, there was still one more use left in the grief seed. Kyuubi curled up on his shelf beside his plush toys as Deku slipped under his covers. It looked like a plush toy. Sleep came easily to Deku, but he noticed an odd lack of fatigue that should have accompanied such a physically demanding fight. Thinking nothing of it, his dreams were peaceful. Teituan Shopping Center. Deku fell to the floor upon hearing and feeling an explosive blast. Dropping the clothing his mother had wanted, he ducked for cover under a nearby display table. His heart raced, the smell of smoke spreading out into the air. Had it been a gas main break? A woman's voice cried out, "Villain!" Groaning, the young hero debated inaction. Shaking his head, he doused himself in a green light and swiftly entered his transformation. Not wanting to be powerless, Bakugo's explosion was equipped. Having crawled under the table, he hoped nobody had been there to see him. Regardless, Deku crawled out and made his way through the courtyard, dodging a falling piece of debris and wafting through the fleeing crowd. Everything was on fire. The sight of both death arms and that same sludge villain made him gasp loudly. Attention brought towards him, Deku fidgeted under the quick glance of both hero and villain. "I can handle this, young one." Biting his lip, the green magical boy reluctantly agreed and nodded. Death Arms could handle it, he was the officially licensed hero after all. The sludge villain sent globs of viscous liquid his way, globs that he easily dodged. The green sludge monster let out a glass-shattering screech and attacked the bulky and official hero. He couldn't be a distraction. Deku slicked back into the growing crowd. These people were in danger of smoke inhalation and debris. "It's not safe here, you guys need to leave." Bystanders grumbled and complained, but eventually listened. Deku figured they believed him to have some sort of heroic authority given his apparent hero costume. Flashes of white fur became visible as the crowd dispersed. Kyuubi sauntered towards him. A question popped into his mind. "Kyuubi, I thought I got rid of the witch's kiss or whatever, why is it still attacking?" Its tail swished calmly, despite a piece of rebar embedding itself in the nearby sidewalk with a harsh clang. Kyuubi's voice rang out into his mind. "Witches are not the only source of evil. Humans are capable of evil without direct influence from a witch. It was a somewhat depressing statement. Evil people existed and always would exist. Witches were not a scapegoat, only one cause of crime and suffering. The sludge quirk user was probably already a villain. One that had been easily preyed on by the sinking witch. A deep voice caught Deku's attention, specifically the mention of a kidnapping. Towards the villain, Death Arms spoke. A child was taken hostage. You coward. Green eyes snapped behind him, completely ignoring both the fleeing crowd of people and Kyubi. Past the tendrils of dark green and brown, Deku could see sprigs of blonde spiky hair. No way. Further movement revealed that all too familiar face. Panic surged through him, enough to send him running back towards the villain before thinking it through. Death Arms cried out as a wave of sludge was sent their way. Jumping up into the air, he easily hurtled over it with the boost of his green energy. Landing in a puddle of sludge, he groaned while trying to shake it off his feet. Mere meters from the shocked villain, Deku faltered. The explosion quirk would harm Bakugo. The villain sneered, taking this opening to make a grab at him. Darting back, he fell into muscular arms. Flinching, he turned to face Death Arms' scowl. I said, I got this. Pushing Deku away, he could feel the licensed hero's strength. It was immense to say the least, sending Deku tumbling back a good 10 meters or so. He didn't expect anything less, having studied the hero he had seen patrolling around his neighborhood every now and again. Coughing at the rough ejection from battle as he skidded along the pavement, he wiped a smear of blood from his freckled cheek. With dread, the magical boy watched as Death Arms failed to affect the villain. A strength quirk would do nothing against an elemental body quirk. If one punched sludge, it would simply flow away, reforming itself easily. Raw strength wouldn't work. Fist caught in the villain's sludge, the hero was swatted away. Crashing into a nearby storefront with a thud, the metal-grated entrance dented significantly. Death Arms groaned. Could Deku now act? Bakugo stirred, suddenly flaring back to life in an angered rage. Fighting against the villain, he bit and tore at the sludge confining him. He yelled out in frustration, I won't let sewage like this swallow me. A flurry of explosions soon followed. He was trying his best to break the villain's hold. It was Bakugo's courage despite adversity that fueled Deku. He could take this thing on. He'd just have to be careful, that's all. Death Arms had been temporarily decommissioned and there was no way in hell Deku would wait for another hero to arrive. Rhythmic thudding bounded towards them. He could spot MT Lady from the corner of his eye. She couldn't fit through though. She couldn't save them. It was just too risky to wait with Bakugo on the line. Amping himself up for the fight, Deku flexed both of his gauntlets, small explosions sparking up into the air. Yellow eyes locking onto him, the magical boy gulped. If he could take down a witch, this villain should be a piece of cake. The only problem was leaving Kacchan unharmed. Green light flared around him wildly and wind whipped at the crowd. Death Arms glanced. The crowd mumbled in fear and confusion. Mount Lady watched apprehensively. What power! The villain grumbled out, suddenly releasing a wide-eyed Bakugo from its grip. Tossing the boy to the side with no regard for his safety, Deku frowned. At the very least his friend was safe. Paling upon realization, Deku jumped back a few steps, the green energy dissipated from the air. Dozens of sludge tentacles grabbed for him, some growing hands and others simply attempting to wrap around his limbs. Knowing what would happen if such occurred, he was swift on his feet. "Stupid Deku. You're in my way of destroying this punk-ass villain." Flinching at the aggression, Bakugo's words had distracted him enough for a disturbingly warm tendril to wrap around his ankle. With a panicked yelp, Deku thrust his palm towards it and detonated an explosion, withdrawing in surprise as the sludge splattered away from him. The green hero exploited this new opening, diving towards the monster with an explosion-boosted velocity. Green energy reinforced his fists. Instead of sinking into the creature, his fists audibly smacked against the surface, a gargling howl soon following. As Deku's mimicked explosions blasted the villain to bits once more, he jumped back to take a breath. Bits of charred sludge rained down around them, Kyubi commented. Wind blasted through the streets, papers flew everywhere and citizens braced against the wind force. "That was a public use of your powers. They'll assume it to be a quirk, but be careful. That was a clever use of your magic. You consistently surprise me, Izuku Midoriya." Deku was gathering the words to respond. Before they could be uttered, a harsh shriek interrupted his thoughts. "Who the fuck are you?" The magical boy froze. With choppy and jittery movements, Deku drew his sweater drawstrings and faced Bakugo. The hood did little to hide his fearful pallor nor his characteristic green hair. Backing up slowly, he yelped upon hitting a bench. "Oh, what did you do to Deku and why did you steal my quirk? What kind of fucking costume is that?" Rage dripped from his words, and suddenly, Deku was back in middle school. "I swear that's not what happened, Kachan. Why you know when you hit me, right? I felt something off then because of your explosions. I played around with that feeling and I discovered my quirk. I really thought that I had been quirkless, but apparently, I'm able to mimic the quirks that are used on me." See, from the tips of his fingers, small explosions sparked and popped. It did nothing to calm Bakugo. "Give it back. You're not Deku." There was no reasoning with Bakugo now. Drooling with rage, his eyes were impossibly wide. Deku had never seen Kachan this angry before. An explosive fist was sent his way. Jumping back with a green-enhanced step, the fist missed him completely. Fight or flight kicking in, his body opted for flight. Too many eyes watched him. Death arms. Deku. Mount. Lady. The crowd undulated with excitement. Media would arrive soon too. He couldn't be here for any of that. Like he had practiced the previous night, Deku took flight. Soaring through the air was easier now than it had been at night, from both his experience and daylight guiding him forward. Each step sent an ethereal green burst from his feet. Death arms got up from the wall. Groaning loudly, he came to face the stunned crowd. He sympathized. Too much had occurred for him to react. The boy had worn a costume and so probably hadn't arrived on accident. A problem was now evident to both him, the crowd, and Mt. Lady. They had never seen or heard of this green hero before. It was a problem he mentioned to the reporter while answering her questions. Although to her, he said that the boy wore a green outfit but he couldn't see his face and that he didn't think the middle schooler was a vigilante. That was a complete lie. He distinctly remembered the smattering of freckles, but nobody else besides him and the villain had been close enough to see past his hood. That boy had saved his friend or enemy from what he saw. No, It was probably a brother. They both had similar quirks and were fighting as if habitual. An argument had followed, something about stealing and being able to do anything. An ambulance took away the blonde middle schooler, the kid who had previously been imprisoned by the sludge. He felt bad for the poor kid, knowing how frightening the experience of suffocation was. With each burst, Deku flew further and further from the shopping district. He was fine with that. The other heroes could handle the rest. He was sure that Mt. Lady would do her thing and finish up helping the people. From the sirens he had heard, the police were nearing too. He wasn't running away, he was practicing self-preservation. He wasn't a vigilante hero, he just wanted to save his friend. The wind rushing across his face was not enough to dry his tears. Deku was crying again, but this time from happiness. Bakugo was okay. The sight of him being swallowed up by the sludge would be with him for a while. It had been truly disturbing seeing his friend overpowered like that. When he eventually landed near his home, he willed away his transformation in a small flash of green light. Sweat dotted at his skin, he held his soul gem in hand. It had only slightly dulled. He wouldn't worry about it for now. He could go witch hunting another time and he still had the remaining use of that grief seed. Knocking on his front door, his mother greeted him with a smile. She glanced at his hands. Izuku, where are the things you bought? Deku scratched at his hair and blushed. Mom, didn't you see the villain attack on the news? Worried, she grabbed him up in a huge. Deku sighed. His face would have been hidden by his hood and the media crews hadn't arrived by the time he made his escape. Things would be fine. Oh my sweetie, you weren't hurt, were you? Here, I'll take you to the clinic for a quick checkup, make sure you didn't get a concussion or anything. As much as Deku disliked the doctor's office, he'd go if it pleased his mother. She honestly cared for him, and that was enough. It was later next evening when he ran into Bakugo again. Deku had been asked to fetch the items. The ones he would have already gotten for his mother if not for the villain's attack. His clinic checkup had been fine, absolutely no signs of physical trauma from the incident. His mother had been pleased with that. Normally, she'd never let him go back outside after an event such as that, but she felt as if he could handle himself now. It was a thinly veiled way of her saying that she didn't fear for her son anymore now that she thought he possessed a quirk. Golden light cast the residential street in a warm glow. The sun was setting. Deku smiled. Cars passed him and birds called out lazily. The peacefulness was disturbed by the repetitive sound of pounding footsteps. They neared him. Deku glanced over his shoulder, flinching somewhat. Kachan, he muttered in a confused state. Bakugo stopped running around 3 meters or so from him. Planting his hands on his knees, the blond boy caught his breath. His breathing was labored and obstructed by saliva. Deku gripped the strap of his bag nervously. Though, as time went on, the exhausted panting turned to panting from anger. Bakugo was seething. I never asked you for help. Deku stepped back, his ring humming with discontent. No, he didn't need to transform. Bakugo noticed the fear, exploiting it as he took another step forward with a cruel scowl. Clenching his hands, he shook with anger. Before giving Deku a chance to respond, he continued. And I never asked you for help. Got it? His ring resonated stronger. Deku took another step back. Sweat beaded at Bakugo's forehead. I was fine by myself. They both knew that definitely wasn't true. You're still a quirkless failure to me. I don't know what kind of black magic shit you did, but you didn't get any of that power without my help. You said it yourself, right? I'm the reason you developed that pathetic mimicry quirk. Isn't it funny how the only way you can fight is by copying other people? Even your quirk is pathetic just like you. Don't think you can look down on me. It was a conscious effort to restrain his transformation. His body begged him to protect himself from this very real threat. Bakugo wouldn't take it too far though, right? Deku hoped he wouldn't do anything drastic. They had known each other since childhood. That meant nothing now though. Deku glanced towards the ground, remembering how Bakugo had urged him to commit suicide. That had been the moment when it had gone too far. Deku would never forgive him for that, preying on his fragile emotions and depressingly low self-esteem. Clenching his brow, Kacchan spat out. Are you trying to make me owe you? Don't look down on me. You damn nerd. If anything, it was the opposite. Deku wanted nothing to do with the bully. He didn't need to have anything to do with him anymore. They weren't friends. As the menace turned away and stomped off, Deku couldn't help but let out a laugh fueled by relief. His soul gem stopped resonating. He was safe. It was embarrassing how much that encounter had affected Deku. Heart racing, he chucked awkwardly and continued on his way home. Bakugo would never change. Even with a quirk, the boy would still find a way to antagonize him. The silver lining was that, albeit begrudgingly, Kacchan had accepted his prior explanation. Bakugo believed his newfound abilities to be a quirk, even if somewhat suspicious. Deku didn't know if that suspicion was genuine or misplaced anger. Half an hour of walking down the road later, a girl rounded the corner. He glanced up at her. White hair curled around her head in a side chignon. Her outfit was plain, simple. He recognized it from the nearby high school. He would be going there if he didn't make it into UA. Wind blew at Deku's hair. He brushed it from his eye. His soul gem resonated, but not from fear. It was picking up magic. She glanced at him momentarily but faltered. Her smile was warm, inviting. Kyubi strode up alongside her. Deku couldn't help but gasp at the realization. A ring was worn on her finger, a silver one embedded with a golden yellow stone. Shaped like a sun, he stared a bit too obviously. You know, my eyes are up here. She laughed but Deku blushed. It was a funny innuendo, one meant to break the ice. Oh, yeah, I was just a bit surprised, that's all. You're a... She nodded, interrupting him. Yes, I am. We have some things I'd like to discuss. Kyubi stared, jumping up to sit on a nearby bench. Mind if I drop off these things to my mom first? I kinda wasn't able to do it yesterday and I don't want to bail out on her again. He held up the shopping bags for her to see, not struggling with the weight as he usually did. The girl nodded, brushing a loose strand of white hair from her eyes. They walked alongside each other to Deku's home, one noticeably more awkward than the other. Hands stuffed in his pockets, Deku pointedly kept quiet. He didn't have anything to say, and his surprise would probably mess up any words too. The girl was unperturbed. She wasn't as surprised. Her uniform was pretty, pale beige accented with browns and greens. Deku wondered if he'd get to wear that outfit, but didn't dwell on it. He wouldn't be going to that high school anyway, it was not of his concern. It was nice to wonder though, what his life would have been like if he didn't feel the burning passion for heroics. They still hadn't spoken much by the time they ascended the steps to his front door. Knocking quietly, Deku hoped she wasn't home. He knew what she'd think, and wanted to avoid all of that mess. If she wasn't home, he could simply place the bags up in her room and deal with the problem at hand. He didn't think it was a problem, more like something that urgently needed to be addressed. Steps thudded towards the door. She was home. Deku glanced at the girl nervously, still somewhat in disbelief. It had all happened so fast, he still didn't even know her name. He had forgotten to ask. His mother's eyes widened at the sight before her lips grew up in a smug grin. My dear, found his girlfriend on the way. You weren't trying to sneak her in, were you, Izuku? Flushing a deep red, the girl simply laughed. A voice resonated in his mind, but it was not Kyuubi's. Want me to play the part? I'm assuming you've had to resort to a few excuses after contracting. Hell knows I have. Still looking at his mother, he attempted to think out loud to the girl. To his doubt, the effort was successful. Yes, please. She thinks my non-existent girlfriend was the one who stitched my costume. I told her it was for if I get into UA. I'm not the best at lying, so it kinda just happened. Thank you for covering for me. Still blushing, Deku responded out loud to his mother. Yeah, we met at school. No, I wasn't trying to sneak her in. I just came to return what you sent me out for. We saw each other on the street and decided to hang out. The white-haired girl nodded with a small laugh, corroborating his story. Did Izuku-kun show you the costume I made for him? He told me he was applying for UA, so I wanted to offer a token of my support. From the way his mother smiled at her, he could tell she approved. She bought it so far. The girl spoke to him mentally once more. My name is Kazane Otsuka. Pleased to meet you. Izuku-kun. His blush deepened. At least he knew her name now. Inko opened the door further for them, beckoning her son and his girlfriend inside. Deku scratched at his green hair. Actually, Mom, me and Kazane were planning to go bowling. You don't mind, do you? Inko's smile didn't falter. Instead, she beamed and said in a false whisper, "Oh, a date. My son is growing up. Have fun, Izuku." Waving them goodbye, she held out her hand for the parcels, taking them and gently closing the door. Deku turned to glance at Kazane. Gripping her sides, the girl let out an unrestrained bellow of laughter. Tears stung at her eyes as she slapped Deku's shoulder amiably. At least Kazane wasn't uncomfortable. Bowling. Sure know how to make a woman feel special. This time, Deku successfully held back his blush. He wouldn't let her know how much her teasing affected her. Anything to do with relationships in general just made him break out in a rosy red. Walking down the stairs, she tightened the straps on her book bag. At least she believed us, Kazane. I'd rather her think I managed to get a girlfriend than think I'm up to no good. Unhelpfully, Kazane added, she could be thinking both. You know, my mother warned me about what boys were like. Letting out a gasp, he smiled at how outrageously funny she was. The warm feeling in his chest was foreign to him, foreign to him save for rare moments when Bakugo wasn't yelling at him or degrading him. Needless to say, it had been a long time since that warmth filled his chest. He could get used to her snarky attitude, he liked it a lot. Kazane was genuinely funny, as if banter was second nature to her. Ha ha. Where are we headed now? You said you wanted to talk to me about stuff. She nodded. I thought you were taking me bowling. Deku shook his head in comic exasperation. No, we're not going bowling. Who even bowls anymore? Kyubi strolled behind them, lagging along. Yeah, you're right. I don't remember the last time I've bowled. We can go to a park or something if you'd like. I'm not sure if that's too public though to talk about this stuff. Deku motioned to his ring, implying what he meant in regard to this stuff. It's getting late. I don't think too many people will be there. Even if there are, they'll probably just dismiss us as teenagers talking about the latest manga. She was right. All of this magical girl stuff really did sound straight out of a crappy manga. He wasn't sure if that was a bad or a good thing. Lead the way, then. I'm not the best at directions. Kazane smirked and strolled down the sidewalk. It had been overcast earlier in the day, but the heavy clouds had passed. The sun still hung halfway covered by the distant skyscrapers downtown. They still had a few hours of sunlight left. He figured it'd be enough time to cover whatever it was that Kazane wanted. Maybe she just wanted to be friends or allies. He hoped that to be the case. Deku swung idly as he sat in the swing set. Directly next to him, Kazane did the same. She swung much higher though. He didn't swing, knowing it'd likely incur a wave of nausea. There was just something about the repetitive force of swinging backward and up into the air that disagreed with his stomach. Kazane was the first to break the idle chit-chat about the weather and recent news. She brushed a loose strand of white hair from her forehead, placing it back into the side bun. So you're a magical boy, Kyubi never told me boys could contract. He dug his shoes into the crushed stone beneath the swing. Yeah, I am. I figured something like that was on the go. He seemed unsure of what to call me. What did you wish for? She paused, pointedly. The chain on her swing creaked as the wind picked up. That's Deku interrupted. No, it's fine. Sorry, it's probably really personal. I was getting chased by that sludge villain on the news a few days ago, before the mall attack. I managed to hide from it and Kyubi just strolled up to me and offered me a wish. I think I wished to become a hero like I had always wanted, something like that. I don't remember the exact words, but you get the gist of it, right? Kazane nodded, slowing herself down by dragging her uniform shoes on the ground. Dust kicked up into the air but was dispersed by a lone gust of wind. You're quirkless, right? Deku nodded. And you are too. Kazane sighed but agreed. Yeah. Kyubi explained that part to me about interference or whatever. It made me feel not so bad about being quirkless, like I was destined to be a magical girl or something. Izuku, tell me, were you the green costumed boy I've been hearing rumors about online? I read the report about what happened at the Teituan shopping center. That was a courageous thing to do. Not many people would risk exposing their powers in exchange for saving one person. It gave Deku something to think about. Why had he saved Bakugo? Any other person would have let their tormentor and abuser suffer, but Deku had been compelled by those almost pleading eyes. Deku couldn't have ignored Bakugo's silent cry for help. Still, he was a bit nervous over the whole publicity ordeal. Nobody had seen his face, but rumors could still pose a problem. He silently prayed that the buzz would die down, and not come back to bite him in the ass upon applying to UA. Would they know? Deku shook his head. His face had been concealed. Plus, it's not as if MT. Lady or Death Arms would be at the school to identify his costume. He took a deep breath. He'd be fine. I still feel bad about not neutralizing the villain the first time I faced him. I know that it's not like I could have known about its ability to reform if separated, but still. A lot of people were hurt and property was destroyed. That person I saved used to bully me about being quirkless, actually. He's the reason I was hanging around at school late anyway. There was just something about the way he looked at me when he was being swallowed up by that villain. There was no way I could have stood idly by when I knew I had the power to do something. I think, as a magical boy, that I have both the responsibility to fight both villains and witches. Help use this blessing for good, right? She wasn't meeting his eyes. Her tone was tired, fitting to the golden ambiance. You did all that you could. I wish that I was as selfless as you. Not gonna lie, but I really don't deal with villains or any of that heroic stuff if I don't have to. I stay in my lane and they can stay in theirs. I know it sounds harsh, but I just don't want to use the extra magic. That's not to say you shouldn't either, it's just not for me. I'm probably explaining myself badly. She shook her head, unhappy at her own words. Deku fiddled with his ring, feeling it resonate with the airy and light feeling of Kazane's soul gem. It felt different than his, as if it had a unique magical signature. My mom doesn't get it either. I've always wanted to be a hero like All Might, ever since I was young. Even after being diagnosed as quirkless, I didn't suppress my dream. That's why I want to use my magic to help others, even if it's unneeded. You're probably taking the logical route, which I should honestly be doing too. Again, Kazane shook her head. No, you should follow your dream. You're applying to UA, right? That's probably a good thing. They'll teach you a lot of skills that'll probably be useful to your life as a magical boy. I considered it too, but decided against it for my own reasons. I wouldn't have an explanation as to how I had suddenly Deku now understood that he was lucky to have the power of mimicry. It was honestly a believable way for him to explain why he didn't used to have a quirk. I'm applying to UA before school starts up again. I feel like it's my duty. Thank you. I appreciate the encouragement. Kazane didn't respond, simply choosing to swing in silence. A few peaceful moments under the sun's glow later, she added with a stern look. You shouldn't be this friendly with other magical girls, not that I mind though. They often compete aggressively for grief seeds and defend their territory. It's not uncommon for one to kill another over territorial disputes. Deku paled, facing Kazane. Words failed to breach his lips. I didn't know that. Guess that makes sense. I never thought about that before. Are you like that? Adrenaline coursed through his veins, but his ring did not resonate. No, I'd have killed you already if that were the case. I need an ally, somebody at my back. If you were moral enough to risk your life to save your bully, I can trust you. It's hard, sometimes, I just need somebody I can talk to about this stuff, or bowl with." She laughed, then continued. "Kyuubi's great and all, but he's not another human." A deep exhale pushed itself from Deku's nostrils. He had subconsciously held his breath, fearing her answer. Part of him knew she just wasn't like that. Swinging somewhat, he contemplated the idea of a hostile magical girl. He'd have to be more careful about demonstrating his abilities. It wasn't just quirk regulatory bodies he had to worry about. Following the idea of grief seeds and their apparent value to the logical conclusion, the territorial and competitive aspects made sense. Part of him just didn't want to think of that though. Part of him wanted to relish the goodness of being a magical girl. Just as some quirk users were evil, some magical girls were evil too. They were no different. "I take it this is your territory then." "Sorry about that witch near the harbor, I had no idea actually." A simple nod was enough to let Deku know it wasn't a problem. "It was a bit concerning though, I must admit. I woke up in the middle of the night after my soul gem picked up a large flare of magic. You can probably slightly sense mine. Some have described it as peaceful and light, somewhat cottony. I've never felt my own though, so I can't confirm that. Normally, new contractees don't know how to reduce their magical signature, so it's not like I assumed you to be some veteran taking my territory." Kazane took a breath, clearly caught up in explaining everything to Deku. "We'll have to work on getting you to passively conceal your signature. It gives you away to most magical girls and witches nearby. I can tell from the difference in signature intensity that you've probably used a grief seed or two. I'm not sure if Kyuubi told you yet, but using a grief seed reinforces most aspects of your gem. Signature being one of them, it restrains it and allows you to control your magic more precisely. Think of how when you reduce the size of a waterspout, it has a higher pressure." He was thankful for the explanation, as well as the analogy. It made sense in a way he couldn't explain. "That's a great analogy. And yeah, Kyuubi told me a bit about the grief seed usage thing, but not about my magical signature." Kyuubi stalked up to the two along the nearby monkey bars. Deku faced him, pondering his question and its phrasing. He didn't want to offend it, immensely thankful for the opportunity to contract in the first place. "Why didn't you tell me about my magical signature, Kyuubi?" His tone was light-hearted, intentionally so. In response, Kyuubi swished its tail rhythmically and spoke to both of them telepathically. "Oh, well, I felt like you two would make a great match, and so if I did tell you how to control it, she wouldn't have been able to track you. Besides, Kazane is better at explaining these things than I." Deku nodded and blushed, unable to meet Kyuubi's eyes. Quietly, he said, "Sorry for doubting you or whatever, I was just confused, that's all." Kyuubi cocked its head. "It's no issue." Kazane laughed amiably at them, reaching over to pat Deku on the shoulder. "Yeah, as I was saying, my territory extends from the harbor to around the Teituan shopping center." "Oh, whose territory is it up by UA? I'll probably be heading there in a few months." Kazane bit her lip. "That's the thing. I don't know. I've gone up there before to take out a witch, but I felt like I was being watched. I knew after defeating the witch that it wasn't my territory, and so I got out as fast as possible. There was no need for conflict, and I didn't want to waste magic fighting. I'm sure it'll be fine. Anyways, how are you taking things? Do you need to talk about anything?" At the question, Deku let out a sigh of relief. Pushing himself around on the swing, he let his muscles relax. I'm pretty tired actually. Other than that, I'm content. I think I'm taking things rather well, but I must admit to being excited about everything. I know how serious being a magical boy is after fighting my first witch. It wasn't what I imagined at all. What did you imagine, Izuku? Deku hesitated, nervous about seeming naive. Well, I expected pointy hats and green skin. Not a giant mask and flying pigs. The mask was eating its own what's the word? Familiars, yeah, them. It vomited them back up at me and I barely got out of the way. You can call me Deku, only my teachers, and mom calls me Izuku. She contemplated his words but didn't show any signs of an adverse reaction. Yeah, that's pretty normal for a witch. Swinging her legs from the seat, she added. Oh, like Dekiru. I think it's fitting for a magical boy. Deku wouldn't inform her of its ironic meaning. There was no reason to be a downer when things were positive. Instead, he asked, "What's my magic signature like? Can you describe it?" Kazane stood from her swing and yawned before approaching him. The crushed rock ground with each step. Since you're not transformed I can only slightly feel it even at this distance, but it's there. I don't know how to say it without sounding kinda mean, but it feels very analytical, but not in a judgmental kinda way. Fluttery, too, like your stomach after too much caffeine. I think that sums it up, yeah. Satisfied, Deku got up too. That tidbit of information wasn't wasted on him though. His magical signature was restrained when not transformed. Having caught her yawn, he let out a restrained sound of exhaustion as well. I promise I'm not judging you, haha. She playfully punched his shoulder. It didn't hurt. I know. Tomorrow I can teach you a few things and go over the basics again in case you forget stuff. I'll meet you at your house in the evening and we'll go back to mine. After that, we can probably search for a witch. I'll teach you effective strategies for that too. Down. Deku's response was a bit too quick and eager. Yeah. Kazane rubbed at her eyes. Here. She held out her phone, the screen showing an empty contact sheet. Taking it in hand, he typed in his phone number alongside filling in a few other fields such as his birthday and address. Sending himself a text, he confirmed that it worked upon feeling his own phone vibrate against his leg. Deku smiled. He handed it back to Kazane with that same hopeful grin. I put in my birthday too, and my address and stuff. Just so you'll have it if needed. Nodding and turning away, she added. I know my way home, and thanks for the number. See you tomorrow, alright. I might text you, if I finish my chores before bed. This was a lovely chat. Kyubi followed Kazane away. Deku lingered in the park after her exit, swinging alone before leaving too. His mother was asleep on the couch by the time he returned home. He was thankful, as it prevented probing questions about his date that he was sure would have otherwise occurred. Kazane showed up the next day at the exact time she said she would. Staring at his slightly dimmed soul gem on the counter, he spooned soggy cereal into his mouth. His mom couldn't see the thing, for which he was glad. The cereal was bland and gross, but apparently healthy. As the last spoonful entered his mouth, his phone vibrated with a notification. Mother hearing it too, she inquired. Who's that, dear? Is it Kazane? Nodding. He didn't bother responding. She'd probably say something embarrassing. Deku didn't want to hear anything like that. Since it was on the edge between spring and summer, Deku decided to forego a sweater or vest. It was warm enough as to where such was not needed. Glancing at the message, it read, "Kazane. I'm outside now, can't wait to bowl smiley face." Lightly laughing, he slipped on his shoes and descended outside. The fresh vernal air engulfed him. He could smell blooming flowers on the wind. She looked up at him, a smile forming on her face. Her hair was done up in that side chignon that complemented her facial structure nicely. Kyubi stood perched on her shoulder. "Hey, Deku. Ready for a training session with Kazane? People have told me that I'm a very harsh teacher." The duo continued down the street, towards the same direction as the park. "Yeah, I'm ready. If it'll help me use my powers more efficiently and safely, I'll write essays if I have to." She smiled once more. Enthusiasm always makes these things a little easier. Deku turned into the park, but Kazane glanced back as she strolled past. "Come on. We're not going there. It's one thing to talk about magical stuff in public, but another to actually use it. There's an abandoned apartment complex near my house. It has an enclosed courtyard we can train in. Nobody should be there, and if they're not the kind of people that would be believed if they saw us and reported illegal quirk use or something." He was fine with the idea, but trekking through an abandoned building didn't seem ideal. What if they stepped on a nail and contracted tetanus? What if they ran into a bunch of delinquents or even drug dealers for that matter? No, he told himself. Kazane had more sense than that to lead him into a drug den. Worst case scenario was that maybe a few homeless people were squatting somewhere in the building. 15 minutes of walker later, they stopped in front of the large gray building. Cracked windows loomed overhead, moss hung down and flowed with the wind. It was definitely abandoned. A crow cawed ominously. They glanced at each other, one smiling and the other hesitant. Surrounded by a tall fence, Deku took the initiative and slid his shoe into a link. About halfway up, he heard the sound of a creaking gate and groaned. Kazane had simply gone up to the unlocked gate and opened it. Needless to say, he found himself blushing while climbing back down. She didn't comment, and Deku viewed it as an act of mercy. The stained front door opened with ease. Dust hung in the air. "Don't we need a mask?" Kazane shook her head. "No, our soul gems will passively heal the accumulation of toxins or pathogens. It uses a negligible amount of magic, so don't worry." He nodded as if what she had just said was completely normal. At least he'd never have to worry about food poisoning again, or the bout of cold he'd always get infected with once in the summer and winter. Still, it felt weird to be breathing in all of that dust. He coughed as something scratched at his throat. The building was dark, to be expected from the shattered fluorescent lights. It was peaceful. Light flooded the hallway as Kazane pushed her way through another heavy door. Walking out into the light, they both entered the courtyard. It was about half the size of a soccer field, providing plenty of room for what Deku assumed would be magical training. A soft groan entered his ears as he saw Kazane sitting down on a patch of grass. "Isn't it nice here? I found this place while hunting a witch." She had holed herself up here in the courtyard. "I came back after though. I just love how disconnected it makes me feel like I'm in a post-apocalyptic movie or something. Deku could definitely understand the appeal. So where do we begin? Holding up her arm, she pointed her outstretched arm towards him. Sunlight glinted off the golden yellow soul gem. Well, her body erupted in a gleam of golden light. Deku's soul gem was enveloped in that light, airy, comforting signature. It felt nice. We transform. The sunlight seemingly intensified as white feathers encircled her like a twister. Wisps of clouds circled above as white feathers clung to parts of her body. Deku gasped as she seemingly caught on fire in golden sparkly flames. A piece of brilliant white armor formed on her chest. It looked like something a knight would wear from one of his video games, gilded with gold and somewhat opalescent. From the bottom of the chest plate, a golden shimmering skirt erupted, knife-pleated and somewhat stiff. On her hands, a pair of lightly armored dark cream gloves formed. They weren't heavy by any means, but seemingly offered a decent amount of protection. A golden circlet grew from her forehead, passing through her white hair and glinting with the intensified sunlight. To protect her feet, a pair of opalescent white boots formed, trimmed with gold accents and winged on the heels with white feathers. A star-shaped brooch was embedded over her heart, it teemed with sunlight. Deku watched with star-filled eyes, taking in every moment of her transformation. It was cool, to say the least. His outfit was definitely not as cool. He honestly wanted armor like that. She laughed warmly at his apparent admiration. Once again, my eyes are up here. His barely came to rival, papers flying about and revealing his green and plush outfit. She seemed just as fascinated as he had been watching hers. It made him wonder, did he look as good as her? It was a frivolous thought, but he wondered if people would take him seriously as a hero in his outfit. From appearance alone, it would seem to a stranger to serve no tactical purpose. If anything, the cape and sweater would serve as a detriment by restricting his movement. Running up to him, she grabbed him a bear hug. Almost crushingly tight, she gushed. "Oh my God, you're so cute. I love your bunny rabbit sweater, it definitely suits you." Kazane stepped back, sitting on a large piece of concrete debris. "You're welcome. I thought it was kinda embarrassing at first, to be dressed like this as a guy, but I don't mind it if it's the price to pay for my wish and abilities." She nodded. "Now, I'll show you and talk about my own magic and abilities." Holding her gloved hand out, golden flames erupted and cloaked it. Deku held back a yelp of surprise, holding back his instinct to help her extinguish it. The flames were pretty to look at, similarly, golden sparkles emanating instead of smoke. Approaching her, he felt no heat from the magical flames. "Oh wow, it's so pretty. What do the flames do?" Throwing a glob down onto a nearby twig, he watched as it began smoldering and crackling. Now, he could feel the heat. "My flames will either heal or burn. It's quite useful actually. On the downside, it's only ever one at once. I can't, for example, douse a familiar in flames while healing myself. I'd have to stop attacking altogether to heal somebody. You can probably heal yourself with your magic too, but at a significantly less potent and efficient level. I wouldn't rely on it if I were you. My wish was centered around healing, and so it's one of the powers granted to me." Kyubi explained that part to me, about how our wishes influence the powers we receive. "My other ability is clairvoyance. In my transformation, I have a naturally enhanced aim and can use my magic for clairvoyance. I can see places if I have already been there. For example, if I really wanted to, I could see if people were playing at that park right now. Deku nodded, contemplating both the applications of her abilities alongside the possible link between his wish and his own magic. Kazane likely excelled at ranged combat. That's a very interesting set of abilities. Can you control your flames from a distance? She nodded, seemingly reaching into her soul gem and retrieving a crossbow after another burst of gold light. It was a weapon that would complement her abilities nicely. Using a crossbow and clairvoyance would probably let her pull off long-distance attacks at great speed. Deku hummed in content. Sweet. Do you have to reload it with anything? Instead of responding, she demonstrated. Golden light solidified into a bolt, automatically cocking itself back with the crossbow's string. In a loud snap, the bolt shimmered through the air and into a nearby wall. Golden sparkles lingered in the path of its trajectory. Cracks in the concrete wall spider webbed out from the impact. The noise would probably prevent stealth attacks, the one apparent downside to her magic. As if having given a performance, Kazane bowed, seemingly pleased with herself from her smug grin. Motioning towards him, Deku jolted and realized it was now his turn to share. I showed you mine, you show me yours. Deku blushed at the innuendo, failing to meet her eyes for a second. Reaching into his pocket, he produced that familiar leather-bound journal. Opening it, he was surprised to see more than the one lone page about Bakugo. An impressed sound escaped his lips. 2 more pages were present, subsequently titled Hamamoto Fukusabaru, Superhuman Strength and Kubota Tsurayuki, Sludge Form. Much like Bakugo's page, they contained a small list of information and general observations he had made mentally during their fight. The journal seemed to be a mix of things he had observed during battle alongside things he hadn't known. For example, the 2 of their names. It was a weird feeling to gain that information without having to ask. Honestly, it made him feel like he had invaded their private lives. Well, for Hamamoto anyway, he had no regard for the sludge villain's privacy. Flipping back to Bakugo's page, Deku noticed that it had updated. Underneath his quirk outline, there was a small bar that extended to in red 7 out of 10. Beneath, magic cost, was listed. Certainly a useful feature. He briefly wondered how long it would take for the other pages to update. All of which Deku remembered being told, so there weren't any secrets or anything. Alongside a delicately drawn portrait, was a small biography of personal details. Sorry, I'm trying to pick what to show you. Her ears perked up and she grinned. Oh really? I thought you were just reading a book. The sarcasm amused Deku. He found it genuinely funny. The explosion quirk was not what he wanted to test out right now. He already knew what it could do. Instead, he flipped to the page on Hamamoto. Reaching into the paper, that cold feeling enveloped his right arm. He could feel that armor solidifying around his fingers, but not like the gauntlets from Bakugo. The change was almost immediate when he removed his hand from the page. It surprisingly did not cause pain. Deku's form grew taller, gaining about a foot or 2, muscles bulking up significantly. This quirk came with a pair of knuckle dusters made from that same pine green metal. The shift was similar in appearance to Death Arms, he thought. Kazane gazed at him with a hint of worry. He was unsure if she approved. Having this much muscle mass felt weird, it wasn't like him. His arms couldn't even rest flat against his sides, it was honestly embarrassing. He placed the journal back into his pocket, noticing how the weight completely disappeared upon letting go. I didn't know I'd end up like this, haha. It doesn't suit me at all. At least my costume grew with me. If his outfit was not weaved from his magic or whatever arcane source, it would have surely ripped, scarring Kazane for life. She raised an eyebrow. Kazane didn't understand. How come you didn't know? Isn't this your magic? Deku shook his head, staring down at his muscular body. My magic is to mimic quirks. This quirk belongs to Death Arms. I haven't used it before. Kazane blanked. Her face lit up with a toothy grin. Holy shit, Deku. Do you know how strong that is? You can practically get anything you want. I'm so glad we met up. We can be a real team together. Hold on now. I'm trying to think of somebody I know with a really strong quirk. Deku beamed. Never in his life had he ever thought those words would be uttered to him. Never in his life did he think somebody would praise his strength. None of this would have been possible without Kyubi. It was all thanks to him. Haha. I wouldn't get too excited. It's not that easy for me to mimic somebody's quirk. It has to be used on me, probably when I'm transformed, and then it appears on a page in my journal. Depending on the quirk, I think it has a magic draining rate. The explosion quirk I have is rated 7 out of 10 for magic usage, whatever that means. Kazane tapped her chin. Well, what's the rating for that quirk there? Deku retrieved the journal and glanced at the page. It had updated. The bar on this quirk's page was significantly smaller. Magic cost 4 out of 10. That had to be a good sign that this quirk didn't require much magic to use. Thinking back to his prior witch fight, he frowned. The more he thought about it, the more he realized it probably wouldn't have been that useful. That was probably why the cost was so low. It was a one-time use to transform his body into a hulking physique. It probably wasn't completely useless though. The journal was placed back into the large sweater pocket. 4 out of 10. I don't think it's a constant drain. It doesn't feel like that. More like a burst of usage to get into this Hulk mode. Kazane glanced around the empty courtyard. A bird sang. Dust floated down from the sky, illuminated by reflected sunlight. Her eyes came upon a large chunk of concrete debris. Pointing to it, she said, "There, lift that piece of concrete for me, K." It was done easily. Deku gripped under the debris, grip almost crumbling the material as he lifted it up in front of him. A surprised gasp came from Kazane. Albeit silently expressing it, Deku felt the same. Super strength would also be useful for certain situations. He'd definitely make use of it. The chunk was dropped to the floor, it shattered with a burst of dust. She continued her contemplative lecture. Since it has a low rating, I'm assuming it drains your magic at a lesser amount. You'd be better using this quirk against a witch that fights up close and personal. Unfortunately, I haven't encountered that many who do so. A lot of witches have a sort of trump card that can be used at a range. I'm definitely sure it'll be useful if you wish to use it for heroics. Most of the quirks you get probably will be. I haven't forgotten about the explosion quirk you mentioned. Deku's eyes lit up as he grinned. I know, right? It's so cool. I got it from my friend. No, not my friend, it's complicated. I got it because he hit me with his explosions not too long ago. Anyways, I also have a sludge quirk I haven't used before. I got it during that villain attack on the shopping center. It was all over the news. Thankfully though, long after I had left, she jumped on top of another chunk of debris, hanging her legs off the side and swinging them ever so slightly. I wanna see that sludge quirk. Nodding, he retrieved and flipped the journal's page to the sludge villains. Deku did not hesitate as he reached into the page, finding what felt like a handle and hauling it back out. It was shaped like a super soaker and was made from that metallic green substance similarly to his other weapons. Discovering himself what this quirk would provide, his focus was not on Kazane, nor her amused reaction. Staring at his left arm, he watched as he tried to use his quirk, watched as his left arm warped and turned green. With that familiar sludgy consistency, it morphed and slopped around. He undulated it, trying to get a feel for how it controlled. He spread the green quality to his torso, practicing the same movements. Upon shifting his head, he got a bit more nervous. After doing so, he felt a pang of blood in his eyes. Turning around sharply, he saw his reflection and let out a gargling gasp. His eyes were that same neon yellow, arched up and exaggeratedly menacing. His whole body was now that slimy sludge, save for that gold chain choker around his neck, still sporting his soul gem. Deku hadn't known what would happen to it, but this was a reasonable result. It made sense. Curious, Deku aimed the super soaker at a nearby window. Pressing down on the trigger, he watched as a glob of sludge spat out. It shot with enough force to crack the window. Another pump later, glass rained down following a shrill shattering. Holding his slimy right hand up, he concentrated on the splattered sludge, willing it to return. Lo and behold, it flew back to his form, rejoining his body. Curiously, Deku sent out a sphere of his own slime, watching as it hovered midair. He split it in two, watching the two halves before returning it to his body. Kazane clapped when Deku returned to his normal, scrawny form. Deku was relieved to be back to himself. This seems to be an interesting quirk. It seemingly allows you to dodge some attacks while giving you control over a relatively mundane and harmless material. Since it has no harmful properties on its own, you're better off giving it momentum and using it kinda like a battering ram or as large cannonballs. I don't have a good feeling about your soul gem being exposed while in that form. I'd be careful about it if I were you. She yawned. Check the magic use rating for me, and we'll call it a day. It was significantly darker than it had been before they started. Magic use. 7 out of 10. Similar to the explosion quirk. He guessed it to be fair. Deku wouldn't complain. Who would he complain to anyway? Kyubi. No, Kyubi had gifted him with this ability in the first place. 7 out of 10. Sounds about right. That's reasonable. Deku frowned. We didn't get much done today. We just showed each other our abilities and stuff. There's probably a lot more to learn, right? Her laugh was soft, but not mocking. Haha. Don't worry, Deku. We'll get there eventually. It's important that you showed me this stuff because it'll help me come up with effective witch-killing methods. You're right that there's a lot more to learn. We haven't even covered shields, healing, or signature masking yet. Give it time though. Check the brightness of your soul gem too, please. It was a good reminder. He wouldn't have done so otherwise. Willing his transformation away in a flash of green light, he observed the brilliance of his soul gem. It still shined green but was noticeably dull. Kazane's gaze analyzed. It'll last long enough to fight a familiar. You have another use of your soul gem for after. We'll take down one and during the fight, I'll show you a bit about healing and defensive magic usage, alright? I'll be available tomorrow night, like always. Let's head back now, okay? They walked home together. Deku took note of her seemingly empty apartment. There were no cars in her driveway.